The United States has long been the biggest provider of foreign aid. No other economy came close to the United States. Here's a graph, data from the OECD on the foreign aid given by country. Here, one can easily see just how much foreign aid the United States has given to the world. As of 2023, the latest year available, the US provided over $62.33 billion in foreign aid, which is remarkably massive. This aid has helped countless countries deal with poverty, disasters, and conflicts. It has supported food programs, healthcare, education, and rebuilding efforts in war-torn or disaster-hit areas. This aid, however, is being challenged, and that is by no other than China. If we were to compare China's aid to the United States, however, we get to see that from 2013 to 2018, China's aid isn't really that big. Here, as you can see in the graph, for the period, China had provided only $42 billion, which means they only gave an average of $7 billion per year, which is very small compared to the US aid of over $47.7 billion per year. So, why do we say that this aid is being challenged by China? Well, the reason is simple. US aid is known historically as a source of humanitarian support. If this had been forgone, then it would spell disaster for America's foreign relations and global influence. Humanitarian aid has long been a soft power tool, helping the US win hearts and minds across the world, especially in times of crisis. That is a big reason why China, even though it isn't really classified as a developed economy yet, is pouring billions into other countries as it is a tool for global influence. And over the past few months, we have seen the rise of no other than American President Donald J. Trump. Trump has been initiating significant reductions in US foreign aid. In January 2025, President Donald Trump signed Executive Order 14,169, titled Reevaluating and Realigning United States Foreign Aid, which mandated a 90-day pause on all U.S. foreign development assistance programs to conduct a comprehensive review. Following this directive, the administration announced plans to dismantle the U.S. Agency for International Development and integrate its functions into the State Department. This restructuring led to the termination of nearly all USAID employees and the elimination of approximately 92% of its foreign aid contracts, amounting to cuts exceeding $54 billion. These actions have had immediate and profound effects globally. For instance, Pakistan is preparing to deport nearly 900,000 Afghan refugees after the cessation of US funding assistance and the freezing of resettlement programs. Additionally, international aid efforts in regions like Myanmar have been severely impacted, with critical shortages of medical supplies following natural disasters. The reason being, well, the Trump administration asserts that these cuts are intended to eliminate wasteful spending and ensure that foreign assistance aligns with US national interests. On wasteful spending, it makes sense. The American economy, after all, is embattled with debt. If we graph out the total debt of the US to GDP, we get to see that they have indeed emerged as one of the world's largest holders of debt. And by cutting these, the US could potentially save billions of dollars. For instance, in the 2024 budget of the United States, they enacted over $63.6 billion in diplomatic engagement and foreign assistance. By cutting down this enormous amount, the US economy could potentially redirect those funds toward pressing domestic issues, like infrastructure, healthcare, education, and border security. This is the core of Trump's America First policy, which prioritizes internal development over international commitments. But disregarding the rest of the world and prioritizing their domestic economy has sparked criticism. Many argue that while cutting foreign aid may offer short-term savings, the long-term cost could be much higher. Foreign aid is more than just charity. It's a strategic tool. It fosters alliances, prevents conflicts, and promotes American values abroad. When aid is pulled out suddenly, it can lead to instability in fragile regions, allowing rivals like China or Russia to step in and fill the gap. And that is exactly what is happening. China has been aggressively stepping in to fill the void left by the United States. In fact, the data that we showed earlier from 2013 to 2018 is data from previous years. If we look at the ones starting in 2020, we get to see just how much China has stepped up. For instance, here's a graph on the COVID-19 donations by country from 2020 to 2022. Here, you can see that China actually surpassed the US when it comes to COVID-19 related bilateral aid from this period. Furthermore, China has actively been providing financial loans through the Belt and Road Initiative. Between 2013 and 2022, Chinese institutions invested about $679 billion in global infrastructure projects across nearly 150 countries. These projects include roads, railways, ports, power plants, telecommunications networks, and more, addressing critical infrastructure gaps in many developing regions. By comparison, the US spent only about $76 billion on similar global infrastructure projects in that period. In other words, China outspent the US roughly 9-1 on international infrastructure development over the last decade. When Donald Trump assumed office and began slashing foreign aid, it signaled a potential shift in global dynamics, opening the door for China to surpass the US as the leading force in development assistance and international influence. So, where does this leave the world? Does it mean that China would step in as the new global donor and development leader? Very likely, yes. China could potentially replace the US in global influence in the coming years as US aid falls. Fortunately, however, one can also view this in the fact that while China has provided billions to other countries, they are mostly loans, and little is about actual aid. For instance, here's a table comparing the type of aid given by China and the US. Here, you can easily see that the US provides more when it comes to actual aid. China, in this case, isn't really providing this for free. It is more of a loan rather than an aid. The US provides billions in grants that have no repayment. This means recipient countries view Chinese money and American money differently. Chinese funds increase their debt load and must be used on projects that can potentially generate revenue to repay. Whereas US funds can often be used for recurrent costs or social services without repayment. That's the good part about this, and why one can see that China may not really replace the US in global influence in this category, in the short term at least. Moreover, the US spends a large share of its aid on health, education, and governance programs, along with humanitarian relief. For example, here in the graph, you can see that the US aid has budgets for governance and democracy programs, a category China virtually ignores or even finds objectionable. China does not fund democracy programs abroad, and its aid training often teaches how to achieve development without Western-style political liberalization. China's spending is heavily weighted toward infrastructure, productive sectors, mines, factories, and direct economic investments. Chinese aid often builds visible, hard assets, highways, railways, ports, power grids, while US aid often works on soft sectors, improving literacy, public health systems, and government capacity. And finally, of course, the difference between the two is the fact that the US is by far the world's largest provider of military aid and security cooperation. Each year, the US gives billions in foreign military financing (FMF) grants. China, on the other hand, has donated military equipment to certain countries, a notable example being the Philippines. In 2017, after the US Congress stalled a rifle sale to the Philippine police over human rights concerns, China stepped in and donated 3,000 assault rifles gratis to the Philippines. They have also given out several more to other countries as well. But this is nothing compared to the scale of what the US gives. In essence, China acts like a development bank, financing hard infrastructure and providing capital, whereas the US acts like a development ministry, funding public goods, technical assistance, and security guarantees. So, As Trump cuts US aid, does it now mean that American global influence would diminish? Indeed, there is a big possibility of that happening. For instance, Pakistan has threatened to deport nearly 900,000 Afghan refugees following the cessation of US funding assistance and the freezing of resettlement programs. Which means that if US aid would be cut in the coming years, then more problems like this would come out. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.